Formative assessment theory and practices and their different relations to education. Hopefully you've read this article, and if you did, you found that it was very intense and full of a lot of really good research and theories. They throw so much at you during this article that you kind of leave shaking your head going, wow, that's a lot of facts. But what we want to do is just draw from this article certain key elements that keep popping out. And from these key terms, we can further our research and see if we can understand most of this. Just a really good article. The article begins with a strong abstract and keywords, but let's get to what I've already highlighted, and it gets down to the actual statement of the article. This paper focuses on formative assessment as a particularly fertile case for what is known as mattering work. As researchers of formative assessment, our work has been critical of the way the concept has been taken up and the practices this has produced. For in different educational contexts, for example, those where child-centered pedagogy has been privileged. So one thing we want to do is we want to type this. Formative assessment. Educational practitioners' understandings of theories as of critical significance in materializing particular practices. So what we pull from this is, how does the knowledge of theory help with practice? Theories, even if relatively implicit, matter, and they do. The rise of assessment and formative assessment. Formative assessment has attracted growing attention over the last 20 years, and this section right here talks about formative assessment. Assessment thus is seen as being embedded within teaching as an integral part of the educational process, continually providing both feedback and feed forward. At this point, to guard against potentially overly benign associations, we call attention, and it continues talking about research here. When the concept of formative evaluation emerged, behaviorism and mastery learning were in vogue. So let's pull this up. Make sure I spelled that correctly. I did not. Behave, I-O-U. Formative assessments thus became important to support students during their task development so that they came to understand what counted as quality in any particular task. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development also implied that teachers actively collaborated with students during their learning to produce best performances. This is a key word that you will always see in research, and that is Vygotsky. But let's go ahead and expand on that one and go zone of. Slide this over. Now I know the zone of proximal development, but I want to see if you understand it. Nevertheless, the conceptualization of feedback has often remained unproblematized, largely because it is unsupported by any theory of communication. So if we're going to be doing, this section right here talks about, if we're going to be doing assessments and we're going to be doing formative assessments, how do we do feedback, and how has that been theorized yet? As Torrance has shown, rather than fostering learning autonomy, the search for transparency in assessment requirements can foster an instrumental classroom culture. Eldwood has suggested learning is often conceptualized as something happening inside the head. I like that. So let's go to this. What is learning? The emergence of outcomes-based national qualifications, dangers of oversimplification. So this little paragraph right here, as I was reading it, kind of stuck out to me that they were saying that if we continue to have national standards, national tests, and national objectives, are we oversimplifying the curriculum? Are we making, for example, if students have to understand the civil rights movement, and we have a national test which has some key factors on the civil rights movement, is that oversimplifying understanding and knowledge base of that? So, good question. I like that. In ways that bring together issues of curriculum and assessment, Young also provides a powerful critique of the emergence of national qualification frameworks, the shift to learning outcomes, and the move from subject-specific to generic criteria. The mattering of formative assessment in the classroom context. And then these authors basically did a case study where they adopted it and they interviewed teachers and they asked them some questions about this. This section draws attention to the ways in which how teachers consider formative assessment, their theory, constrain the possibilities of classroom practice. Despite the freedoms attributed to challenges, classroom assessment practices still drew upon behaviors, vocabularies, and assumptions. So, teacher interview and observation data suggested a disjuncture between teachers' declared exposal of the freedoms of a challenge and the framing of these freedoms within expectations that pupils were to learn particular curricular content. Teachers and head teachers in both case studies gave importance to the open-endedness of challenges, where there was no definitive right or wrong, even if one teacher saw this element of intermittency as involving students unlearning some of their expectations of schoolwork. So what that means is the larger projects shift away from a formative assessment style and move towards a multiple level assessment style where students are assessing themselves, teachers are assessing them, giving them feedback as they go. So this was good when they have large projects like that. However, teachers broke away from the definition of a formative assessment and had the students doing other. So by the book, the teacher was going against the national standards and going against the whole idea of what they were supposed to do with formative assessments. But in the long run, the teachers actually enjoyed it. The article continues on. However, in both cases, teacher formative assessment commentary focused to a great extent on students' group work and presentation performances rather than on the wider social issues than they're implicated. So when it came time to grade the students, even though they did these huge projects and they enjoyed these projects, it came down to just grading them on how well they did a presentation. Not the best situation. So a great deal of the feedback arising from their way of orchestrating students' voices was left implicit, although students could be highly evaluative and critical of each other. All right, so what does this mean? What are we reading here? We're looking at an actual article which talks about how formative assessment has come in, and when it comes into the teacher's world where the teacher understands theories, the teacher is actually using the formative assessment as required by the national standards, but in doing so they're getting away from the assessments that they will use anyway. So for example, if you come into if I have a Votech shop and I ask you to change the oil on a car, I may sit with you and watch you change oil in the car, and you may explain to me what you're doing and why you're choosing this valve and why you're doing all this. But when it comes time for a formative assessment, because I have to give you a formative assessment, I give you just a very simple test to do and you walk through it. So I'm assessing you on one side, hands-on, and we're learning a lot, and then I'm doing a formative assessment that really doesn't do anything. So there's the issue this article talks about. It's the clash between what the student, teacher, or the teacher understands with assessments and theories, and when the real world comes, what are they doing? And the article is seeing that what they're doing is kind of like fake assessments that don't really matter but meet the national standards. The question posed in this final section is what theories might help formative assessments in becoming more educational. So the article discusses is formative assessments bringing anything to the education of our teachers as well as the students. So if you continue with the article, and I read it and I highlighted a bunch of passages in here, including they even tried to quote they quoted some really good articles, but what they're wanting people to do is instead of continue to put in more words and terminology, they're wanting us to understand what's out there now and go from there. So our assignment that will spring from this article, which is a very good one right here, is it's going to be a key term assignment. So I want you to do some research on your own, and please don't use Wikipedia. Let's get away from that. Let's use some actual, do some other research and try to define formative assessment. I'll put this up. How does the knowledge of theory help with practice? We can delete that one. Look at behaviorism. Definitely look at Vygotsky. Definition of learning. and we can delete that one. So we're going to use this article to spring forward and see if we can define these terms. So just some basic directions on how you would write this article. You would just go ahead and just you can do a Word document just like this, and then just type in your answers here. And then you would just, I would probably underline this, and then I would underline this, and I would type my answer here. And I would type my answer there. Very simple to do, and I'll put this on the assignment tab. Thank you very much.